Good evening, everybody. Yeah. How are you? Yeah. How's your anger? Is your anger well and happy? Okay. So I hope, in the evenings and in the next mornings, think about what we've been talking about and then try and observe things in your daily life to see how your anger functions and how your mind is thinking when you get angry. You'll learn a lot. Yeah. Because sometimes our anger is really hilarious. The way it thinks, if you really look at it, it's really rather funny, and we have to laugh at ourselves. Yeah. So I think a sense of humor can be really good sometimes when dealing with our anger. You don't believe me? No, seriously, it can be very, very helpful. Okay, so let's start out with a little bit of breathing meditation like we've done the previous evenings to let our mind settle down. Okay. So again, I'll lead you through the body scan and releasing tension, and then we'll focus on the breath. Again, it's very important, just let your breathing be normal. Don't stress it. Don't push it. Don't try and change it. Yeah, just let it be, but really focus on it and be aware of it. Okay, so sit up straight. Come on. Lazy bones, sit up straight. So like I told you the first night, my experience with Chapter 6, this teaching that we're going through now, comes to due to the kindness of Sam, one of the people who made me very miserable. Because without Sam making me miserable, I never would have realized I had a problem with anger, and I never really would have gone about learning the antidotes to anger. Okay. So any progress I may have made in terms of working with my anger, I have to say thank you to Sam. Okay. Now, of course, at the time he was driving me crazy, I never imagined saying thank you to him. But, this shows that we're able to change how we look at situations, so that things that previously made us quite miserable and angry can now be transformed, and those same situations we can appreciate and find something beneficial in having gone through them. So I think this is important to remember in working with our anger, that difficult situations aren't necessarily bad situations, that we can come out of a difficult situation with a lot stronger character and a lot clearer mind. Okay. So we shouldn't necessarily run away from difficulties, okay, but rather learn how to deal with them, because going through some difficulties can really help us on the path. Because anyway, we're going to have difficulties in life, aren't we? Aren't we? Yeah. Whether we practice Dharma or don't practice Dharma, we're going to have problems in life. This is the way life in cyclic existence is. As long as our mind's under the control of afflictions and karma, problems are going to come. Nothing surprising about problems. Okay. But even though problems will come uninvited, the trick is to use them to cultivate our own good qualities And in the process of doing that, we find out that problems can be transformed into advantageous circumstances, and that something good can come out of a difficulty. Let me give you some examples. Some years ago, I was in, what town was I in? Some town in the South. I can't remember if it was Knoxville, Tennessee, or Atlanta, Georgia, somewhere. But I was invited to a wellness center, and a wellness center is a place that has support groups and other aid for people who are suffering from very severe illnesses. So I was asked to speak at a support group for a group of people that were cancer survivors. And I remember so clearly being there, and I was speaking, but I always liked to learn from the other people, and so asking them about their experience. And there was one woman who said, although I was horrified when I got a cancer diagnosis, I've got to say that it actually has made me appreciate my life much more, and has made me have a much more vibrant life than I used to have. She said, I used to take so many things for granted, and I used to be very complacent and very kind of timid about exploring new things. But because of the cancer, I've gotten braver, and I'm willing to explore new things now that I wouldn't have been willing to explore before. And one example she gave was learning how to meditate. She said before she got cancer, she never would have gone to a meditation class. But after she got cancer, she decided she needed some help. So she started going to a meditation class, and the meditation helped her in so many different aspects of her life. So she said, something good has come out of my having cancer. And so you could see by her being able to look at this situation in this different way, that her whole emotional outlook had transformed. Yeah. So instead of just being depressed, oh, I have cancer, she's found some way to make a meaningful opportunity out of the situation, and to really appreciate new things that she had been learning. Okay? So it's that kind of thing that we're talking about when we talk about transforming difficulties into the path. Okay? That difficulties don't have to necessarily be bad. Let me give you another example of a similar situation of transforming difficulties, in particular a situation in which we could get extremely angry and upset. So I remember one of my teachers, Lama Yeshe, telling us his story of how he left Tibet and became a refugee in India. He was a monk at Sera Monastery when he was young. He was 24 years old in 1959, and it was in 1959 that there was an uprising against the communist Chinese invasion of Tibet, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama fled into exile. And when this uprising occurred, Lama was at Sera Monastery. And so he left the monastery together with some other monks, and they went into the mountains. And I remember him saying that they had their tea bowl, their teacup, because Tibetans don't go anywhere without their teacup. Yeah, so he had his teacup in his shirt, and that was about it. That was all he had, and went into the mountains. And they figured that in a few days things would die down. They would be able to come back from the mountains, go back to their monastery, and resume their studies. Well, that's not what happened. When there was the uprising, there was a lot of turmoil. His Holiness Dalai Lama had to flee. He had to escape there was risk to his life. And so Lama, at age 24, wound up crossing the Himalaya mountains with nothing but his teacup, no advance warning. He didn't go to a trekking agent and have a tour guide and bring tents and a warm sleeping bag and good boots, and none of that. They just had to leave without going back to the monastery at all. And they crossed over the Himalayas in March, so it was still quite cold, and then came down the mountains into India. So in Tibet, at a very high altitude, there weren't many bacteria, so there wasn't a lot of disease. Once all the monastics got into India with all the bacteria, many of them started getting very, very ill. And, they were flooding by the thousands into India. And Nehru, who was prime minister at that time, was very, very compassionate. And he accepted them as refugees. But the only place he could give them to stay at that time was the old British POW camp. Some of you may have seen the movie 7 Years in Tibet. Did you see that movie? Yeah, with Heinrich Herr. And so he was a German prisoner in this British POW camp. That's the one that the Tibetan monks went to when they became refugees. And so many of them got sick. They were completely impoverished and had a very, very difficult time for quite a long time. Yeah, many, many years. And in Lama's own life, his studies were disrupted. He wasn't able to finish his Geshe degree. And so he stayed in the POW camp for some time. And then there was one Western woman who asked him to teach some Westerners. And so he began to teach Westerners and eventually wound up establishing Kopan Monastery. So in talking about becoming a refugee and how his life, the course of his life after that, he said, and I'm speaking as if I were Lama right now, he said, if I had stayed in Tibet and gotten my Geshe degree, I would have, gone back to my hometown monastery. I would have been very important. I would have become a little bit smug and complacent, and I would never have really understood the purpose and meaning of the Dharma, because I just would have been there teaching, taking life for granted, collecting offerings, and just going along. And he said, and at this point he put his palms together like this. He said, I really have to thank Mao Zedong for teaching me the real meaning of practicing the Dharma. Yeah. And he said, I really have to thank Mao Zedong for making me a refugee, because by becoming a refugee, it opened my mind to so many new things, and it enabled me to come here and teach all of you, he said to us, his group of Western students. So I remember sitting there at that time being completely astounded by what he said, when he said, I have to thank Mao Zedong for making me a refugee. Yeah, think about it. Yeah, let's say there was some invasion to Singapore, and all of a sudden you had to leave and go somewhere else with nothing, leave everything you have here behind. Yeah, you might be a little bit upset and angry, do you think? Yeah, if you had to be separated from your family and you had to leave your flat and couldn't take anything and your life was totally insecure, you might be a little bit angry at the situation. Yeah. But would you be able to say, I thank whoever it was that made you into a refugee? That would be quite something to be able to do that, wouldn't it? Yeah. So you see, this is the power of, learning to practice fortitude. That instead of getting depressed and discouraged and down in the dumps about such a traumatic situation like going into exile from your home, he was actually able to transform that situation into something good that he really learned from and appreciated. Okay? So this is the kind of thing that we're aiming for when we're talking about practicing fortitude. Now, we're really looking at how we can transform our very life and our very own emotional responses to things so that we can really transform difficulties into the path to enlightenment. And if we can develop that skill, then no matter where we are or who we're with, our mind can be very happy because we can practice Dharma everywhere, no matter what's going on. I met another monk when I was in Dharamsala who was also a refugee. He came from a family that was more well off, but when the communists took over his village, they took over his family's house and they made the house into the local prison. And the communists began to arrest the monks and nuns. He was a monk, he got arrested, and then he was imprisoned in his own family's house. Okay? So imagine your flat becoming the local prison and yourself being arrested and thrown into prison at what used to be your flat. Okay? Would you be a little bit upset? You're all sitting there like, would you be upset or not? Yeah, you bet you'd be upset. Okay, so that was this monk's situation. And what he told me was that at all the time when he was imprisoned, he used the opportunity to do retreat. So the communists didn't let him have his mala, his rosary. He couldn't count how many mantra he was doing. But he would estimate, and he would see, according to where the sun was and how far it went, and he would guesstimate how many mantra he said during that period of time. And so he used his whole time of being imprisoned to do retreat. Yeah? Imagine that. Imagine that. Yeah. When we do retreat, yeah, we make a nice, comfortable room. We buy some extra food that we stash away and hope nobody else knows that we have, because we don't really want to share it, even though we're meditating on being generous. Okay. But we make all these preparations for retreat. But he was just, sitting there in his house, I think meditating on some hay, because that's all there was to sit on, and doing retreat in that kind of situation, okay? So you can see, these are some real life examples of people facing quite substantial hardships who were actually able to transform the situation. Okay. Let me tell you one more story, because I think stories like this are very helpful. It gives you an idea of how you can actually practice. So there was another Tibetan monk, who was imprisoned in China, in Tibet, after the occupation. And after some years of being tortured and imprisoned, he was released. He hadn't done anything wrong. This was just what the communists did to religious people. But when they finally released him, then he escaped into India, and he went to Dharamsala and was able to have an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And His Holiness asked this monk, what was the most fearful situation that you had during all those years that you were imprisoned? Okay? What frightened you the most in all those years you were imprisoned? Okay, because he was tortured. And the monk paused, and then he said to His Holiness, the thing that I was most afraid of was that I would lose my compassion for the people who were imprisoning me. Yeah. Are you as amazed as I am by that? Yeah. That the thing that frightened him most was not, the electric prod, not the floggings, not the torture, but he was most afraid of losing his compassion for the very people who were putting him in prison. Okay. So again, you can see from this person's mind, his reactions, how he practiced, that he was able to transform the situation and make something very good out of it. Yeah. One time when I was in China, I was, where was I can't remember what city I was in, but I met some Chinese nuns who similarly had been imprisoned during the Cultural Revolution. And I don't know how much you know about the Cultural Revolution, but people were really humiliated during that. And they told me that they had to wear dunce caps, the pointed hats that very mean teachers make students wear when they play too much in school. She said they had to wear dunce caps and then carry these placards on their front and their back that was denouncing Buddhism. Okay, and they were nuns. Yeah, so they were forced to take off their robes, wear these placards, go to these re-education seminars, yeah, and walk through town with these placards and with dunce caps, with everybody jeering at them and making fun of them. Yeah. But when they were telling me the story, I was trying to imagine being in that situation, because none of us like being criticized, none of us like being made fun of. And yet this was exactly what happened to them day after day. And yet when they were telling me the story, these nuns were just completely equanimous with it. Their minds had equanimity. They weren't angry. They weren't upset. They had accepted the situation, And even though they were forced to wear lay clothes and work in a factory, they never gave up their ordination. They kept their vows that whole time. And then when the Cultural Revolution was over, they put their robes on again, and they went back to what used to be their temple, which had been destroyed in the Cultural Revolution, and they started to rebuild it. And, they were quite happy people. I found it, again, really astonishing to see in very severe situations like this how resilient people are when they use the Dharma, when they apply the Dharma to their mind. And it made me think of how I have very small problems, nothing compared with the Cultural Revolution or becoming a refugee or anything like that. I have small problems, and I get so bummed out by them. I get so angry and so upset, And yet in comparison, my problems are really like minuscule compared to the suffering that these other people have gone through. And yet they applied the Dharma and had happy minds in very, very difficult situations. Whereas me, because I didn't apply the Dharma, even though the situation was not very bad, I was completely miserable. Okay? So we see so clearly by examples like this that our happiness and our misery doesn't depend so much on the external situation. Rather, it depends more on what's happening inside of our own mind. Yeah, that it's our mind that can make us angry and discouraged and upset, and it's our mind that can make us peaceful and accepting and optimistic. So it's all up to us how we choose to think, how we choose to use our mind. So when we really think about this, it's very, very empowering, because it means that we can do something to improve our situation. That we don't have to go through life feeling like we're a victim of unfair circumstances. Yeah, that even if we're in a situation that was unfair, we can transform that situation so that we benefit from it. Okay? So that's real freedom when we can do that, isn't it? Then we're not, we're not bound by the situation, but our mind can be free because we can apply the Dharma to our mind and change our attitude. Okay, so let's look again at some of these verses and learn some of the ways to deal with our anger. Okay, so yesterday we did verse 9. I'll just read it as a review. Whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy. For having been made unhappy, I shall not accomplish what I wish, and my virtues will decline. Okay? So if we let a situation disturb our own mental joy, then once our mind is unhappy, then we can't accomplish what we wish. And instead, we feel discouraged, we feel depressed and down in the dumps, and then we are immobilized by our own depression or by our own anger. And in that way, we don't create any virtue. And without creating virtue, without creating merit, we can't transform our situation at all. Okay? So this verse is really pointing out to us the importance of maintaining a happy mind, what we talked about yesterday. Okay, keeping our mind happy. Okay, now verse 10. Okay, verse 10 is a very, very special verse. Yeah, this verse is quoted quite a lot, and it's quite profound. Yeah, and if all you remember in these 3 days of teachings is this verse, you have something good in your pocket to use. So let's look at this verse. Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? Okay, so you have a problem, okay, and you look at the problem and you see, oh, I can remedy this problem. There's something I can do, to change the conditions, to change the circumstances. I can fix the situation. So if you have a bad situation and you see that you can fix it, then why be unhappy? Yeah, there's no purpose to being unhappy about something that we can change, about a difficulty that we can remedy. Yeah, because instead of being unhappy, let's just get it together and go out and remedy the situation. Make sense? Okay, so that's the first 2 lines. And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? So if we look at the situation and we see, this situation is beyond my control. I can't control the people in it. It has to do with something that's much larger than me. It's not only my karma that's involved, it's a lot of people's karma. Yeah? So you realize that, you realize you can't remedy the situation. Then in that circumstance, why be unhappy? Because there's nothing you can do. Yeah, the only thing you can possibly do is just accept the situation. Are you getting what I'm saying? Yeah? So either way, if you can remedy the situation, no need to be unhappy, upset, angry. And if we can't remedy the situation, again, no reason to be upset, unhappy, or angry. So this verse, we can transform it in slight ways to apply to a few different situations. Okay? So for example, worry. Yeah, any of you suffer from worrying a lot? Oh, only 2 of you? Maybe a few more people have problems worrying a lot? Okay. So let's use the same verse in terms of worry. If there's something you can do about the worrisome situation, why worry? Do something. If there's nothing you can do about the worrisome situation, stop worrying, because there's nothing you can do. There's no value to the worry. It's true, isn't it? Yeah? So instead of clinging on to our worry and making ourselves and other people dreadfully unhappy, yeah, think about this. If there's something we can do, do it. If there's not something we can do, relax. Our mind sometimes is very funny, and we're afraid to relax. We think, but I have to keep on worrying. Because if I don't worry, and if I'm not miserable, then, I don't know, I'll be apathetic. Okay, so we practice worrying instead of practicing being happy. Okay? Some people do very well at worrying, you know? They really do it quite well. Yeah, my mom was she had a real talent for worry. You know, I bet you my mom worried more than your mom. Yeah. My mom was really good. Anything. She could worry about anything. Yeah. Doesn't matter what it is, she could worry about it. Yeah. So it was great. Everything I did as a kid, I was greeted with my mother's worry. You know. Do you remember being a kid when your parents worrying about you? And it was just like, get off my back, leave me alone, stop worrying. But Singapore parents worry so much. Oh, you know, almost as much as my mother. Not quite, but almost. Yeah. I find parents here so full of worry. Oh, my little child is 4 years old, but his whole life is going to be a disaster because he doesn't know how to add 2 and 2. You know, how is he ever going to get into a good university? Yeah? And so parents start worrying about their children's financial success when the kid is like 2 or 3 years old. Don't you? Yeah? It's like, oh dear, they failed the spelling test. In primary 1, they failed the spelling test. They're not going to get streamed into the upper group. They'll never pass their A levels. They'll never pass their O levels. You know, they won't be able to get a good education. They won't be able to get a good job. My child is going to wind up on the streets begging. You know, why? Because they failed the spelling test in primary 1. That a little bit unrealistic, do you think? The kind of worry that you have about your kids? Yeah. So I think release that worry, relax that worry, because that worry is only going to drive you crazy and drive your child even crazier. Children don't need their parents' worry on top of their heads, you know. Children need freedom to explore and to learn and be creative. Okay? So this verse is very good, you know. If you can do something about it, no need to worry. If you can't do something about it, no sense in worrying. It's true, isn't it? Yeah? So, stop the worrying. Yeah, if you stop worrying, your blood pressure is going to go down and your health is going to be better. It's true, isn't it? Yeah, when you worry, yeah, no wonder you have bad health and ulcers and stomach problems. Okay? So let the mind relax. There's no need to worry about all these things. But I can imagine you thinking, but really, you don't understand. My child is going to be living on the streets because of this spelling test. You know, you can only say that because you're a nun and you don't have any kids. Try being the abbess of a monastery. You have a lot of kids. Okay, let's go on to verse number 11 here. So this verse here, we're moving into a slightly different topic, and we're going to be looking at the objects that give rise to our anger. So what kind of objects, what kind of situations, make our anger grow? So verse 11 says, "For myself and for my friends, I want no suffering, no disrespect, no harsh words, and nothing unpleasant. But for my enemies, it is the opposite. May they burn in hell." But I'm a good Buddhist. I practice meditation every day. Yeah, we're like that, aren't we? Yeah. Oh, I'm a very good Buddhist. I practice meditation. But what's going on in our mind? Oh, I can't stand that person. I hope they go to hell. We have those kind of thoughts, don't we? Come on, you can admit it. Yeah, we're all alike. Okay. So for myself and for my friends, no suffering, no disrespect, no harsh words, nothing unpleasant. Yeah. I am entitled to have everything the way I want it to be. Right? Don't we go through life with that attitude? Everything should turn out the way I want it to be. Why? Because I'm me. And life owes me something. Yeah. I shouldn't have to do anything, but I should have every single good circumstance. Right? Isn't that the way our self-centered mind thinks? Hello? It's true, isn't it? The slogan of our self-centered mind is, I want what I want when I want it. Right? And the world should give it to me without me having to do anything. Because the world is privileged to have me in it. Right? Okay. So actually what this verse is talking about is the 8 worldly concerns. So when we say no suffering, what we mean is no unpleasant sensory experiences. We always want to have see nice things and hear nice sounds and smell nice smells, taste good food, have nice tactile sensations. Yeah. So that's what it means when it says, no suffering. And when it says no disrespect, what it means is no loss. I want only to gain. Yeah. I should have material possessions. I should have money. So not only nice sensory experiences do I want, but I want money and material possessions, right? Then the third one is no harsh words. I don't want anybody criticizing me, nobody ridiculing me, making fun of me, teasing me, pointing out my faults. All those things are illegal. Okay? I don't care what the bankers do, but you cannot criticize me. Okay? And then nothing unpleasant. What that means is I don't want anybody talking about me behind my back and ruining my reputation. Okay? So not only do I not want harsh words to my face, but I don't want a large number of people thinking bad about me. I don't want to have a bad reputation. Okay? So we're very attached to nice sensory experiences, to money and material possessions, to praise and approval, and to a good reputation. When we don't get those four, instead, when we have unpleasant sensory experiences, there's a bad smell, or we see something really ugly, or we hear a bad sound, or when we don't get the money and material things we want, or when we lose them and they disappear, when we get criticism, when people disapprove of us, okay, when our reputation gets trashed and we're publicly humiliated, in those situations we get very angry and upset. Okay? So those are the situations to be really careful of. Yeah? Unpleasant sensory experiences, losing our wealth, having harsh words, and having a bad reputation. Because we're so attached to the opposite of those four things that when we don't get the things we're attached to, or when we get their opposites, then we get really, really angry. Okay? Think about it. Yeah, think about the situations that you get angry in. And I bet you almost all of them will fall into these four categories. Okay, what do you think? Yeah? Do you get angry about those four things involved in those four categories? Yeah? Okay. And then with verse 12, we're again moving into a slightly different topic. And here we're going to be talking about the fortitude of willingly accepting suffering. So remember, I think on the first day, I mentioned that there's three kinds of fortitude or three kinds of patience. One of them is being able to accept suffering or misery. The second one is being able to go through the difficulties of practicing the Dharma. And the third is being able to bear criticism. Okay, so here it's talking about developing fortitude to willingly accept suffering. Okay? Because lots of times when we're in physical pain or mental pain, we don't accept the situation at all. We get really, really angry. Yeah? How many of you get sick? How many of you get angry when you get sick? Yeah? When you don't feel well, do you just get angry? Not even at anybody in particular, but you get angry? Yeah? Or somebody mentioned the other night in one of the questions, if somebody dies unexpectedly, we often get angry. Yeah? So there's many situations in which we face suffering and we respond to the suffering by getting angry. So Shantideva says, the causes of unhappiness sometimes occur, but the causes for suffering are frequent. Without suffering, there is no renunciation. Therefore, mind, you should stand firm. Okay. So the causes of happiness sometimes occur. That's true. Sometimes we experience happiness because sometimes the causes for the happiness are there. Yeah. But the causes for suffering are frequent. Yeah. The causes to get sick, lots of causes to get sick. Lots of causes to be unhappy. Okay. But we have the expectation that we should never have difficulties and we should always be happy, and that only good things should happen to us. And I have a very clear recollection of having a conversation with a Dharma friend of mine. Because you see, I'm very good at complaining. Yeah. When I have, misery, I complain. I don't just take it laying down. I complain. I let everybody know I'm unhappy. Yeah. So I remember talking to a friend of mine and complaining about a situation. Oh, this person did this, and they aren't listening to me, and I'm not being treated properly, and they're taking advantage of me, and, they don't understand, and on and on and on and on, And then my friend said, he was a Dharma friend, he said, what do you expect? You're in samsara. He stopped me right in my tracks. It was like, oh yeah, I've been studying the Dharma for a long time. I know all about samsara, cyclic existence. Yeah, cyclic existence means we're under the control of afflictions and karma. Why do I expect to be eternally happy if I'm under the control of afflictions and karma? That's ridiculous. What a stupid expectation. Yeah, if I want to be everlastingly happy, then I should try and get rid of my afflictions and the karma. Okay? So he was a good Dharma friend. He really, stopped me. I had to think about what I was saying. Okay? So first of all, it's ridiculous to always expect to be happy. And then second, without suffering, there is no renunciation. And it's true, isn't it? Unless we have difficulties, we have no thought to get ourselves out of cyclic existence. Yeah, it's usually only through facing difficulties that we begin to contemplate the disadvantages of samsara. And why it's important to get out of cyclic existence. As long as we see cyclic existence like Disneyland, then we think it's really great, and we don't realize what a prison it is. Okay? So there are some actual good things that can come out of suffering, because when we have suffering, it makes us reflect on the nature of cyclic existence, and that generates renunciation. And it's renunciation, yeah. And what we're renouncing is suffering. We're not renouncing happiness. Who wants to renounce happiness? We're renouncing suffering. Without that renunciation, then there's no fuel for our Dharma practice. We don't try and transform our mind. Okay? So there's some benefit to come out of suffering. And then he concludes the verse by saying, therefore, mind, you should stand firm. So when we face suffering, instead of letting our mind become like applesauce, just gooey and mushy with no substance at all, we should tell ourselves, I need to have a strong mind. Yeah, in the confront of suffering, I need to have fortitude. I need to think clearly. I need to be able to endure some pain. Yeah, and not just melt away at the first sign of distress. Okay. So I think we'll pause here so we have some time for questions and answers. So if you'd like to, come up to the mic and ask, or feel free to write your question on a piece of paper.